Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us. Volodymyr Zelenskyy addressed Parliament in Ottawa to a standing ovation this morning. We'll hear the highlights and why this visit was so crucial for the Ukrainian president. And BC Premier David Eby closed the annual Union of BC Municipalities with a key address and announcing some new measures on housing. We'll take your reaction on the open line. After 12:30, our pets column is back. We're asking you about your more unusual pets, your rabbits, your turtles, your odd snake. What are the challenges when caring for a unique pet? I'm Michelle Eliot. Welcome to BC Today. Thank you for joining us on CBC Radio 1 and live streaming on CBC Gem, cbc.ca/BC, and on the CBC Vancouver YouTube page. This morning, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy started his visit in Canada with an address in Parliament. This is the first time since the Russian invasion of his country that he has visited here. He finished his address in the House of Commons earlier. And to speak about what he had to say and why this visit was so crucial, we're joined by a guest now. Florian Gassner is an associate professor in the Department of Central, Eastern, and Northern European Studies at UBC. Florian, good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Pleasure to be with you.
It's good to have you. Was there anything that stood out for you in his address that he gave to, frequent applause and a standing ovation at the end?
Right at the beginning, incidentally, I run a project called Canadian Monuments of Central and Eastern European History, and President Zelenskyy pointed out one of the many monuments to Ukrainian history that we have in Canada. My team counts about 45, 46. But the first monument in the world dedicated to the Ukrainian genocide by starvation, the Holodomor, that he took a tangible element that anybody can relate to in Canada to just drive home the idea how close the relations between Ukraine and Canada actually are. It was a very strong start to the speech, I found.
And what do you think was the meaning behind that, really solidifying that closeness in the context of the purpose of the visit, which is, trying to shore up more support for the war in Ukraine?
This is also where Zelenskyy's visit was quite different from previous visits he's done in the past couple of days in North and South America, because he visited Brazil, where he met with Lula da Silva, and Lula da Silva is in the faction of the people saying, both sides need to stop fighting, which is a ridiculous statement to make. Or then he went to the United States, where you have the partisan warfare between the Democrats and the Republicans that make his trip very difficult. Whereas in Canada, his speech right now, he didn't have to make demands. He didn't have to plea for anything. There is just a unique bond between the two countries due to the immigration history that Justin Trudeau highlighted in his speech. And so it made sense that this speech would be the last on his tour of America, because here he would have the most welcoming audience and have the best message coming out when he's returning back to Ukraine.
And what do you make of the support that has been pledged by Canada then in light of this visit?
Well, with Canada, it's a bit of a unique situation also because Canada doesn't really have so much of the crucial technology that Ukraine has been petitioning for. So we don't have any strategic long-range missiles like the ATACMS the States have, or the Storm Shadows, which the Brits have already delivered. So, and like the few tanks Canada has were training tanks, and they were happy to deliver them. But at the same time, Canada was always the first in line to pledge money, and they pledged a lot right in the beginning, 1.5 billion. And they are pledging people to train them in the F-14 fighter jets, which they're hopefully going to be getting soon. So while Canadian support will never reach the level of what American support can be or European support, Canada was always first in line to pledge what they had.
And given how far how long it has gone, this war, and the domestic challenges here in Canada, we were talking about housing in a few moments with the cost of living crisis. Can Canada afford what it can continue to give?
Ironically, the two are directly related because the reason the oil and gas prices went up, the reason inflation went through the roof, you must never forget that is because Russia attacked Ukraine. That is what triggered all of this, and that makes it even more imperative to make sure that Russia loses in Ukraine and does not see an incentive to do the same thing again 4 or 5 years down the road. Because even if you look back at 2014, that was a massive economic destabilizer. And in 2014, the logic was, let's give Russia a little bit so then we have peace and then the economy stabilizes. And that worked fine until Russia then attacked the next time and it got even worse. So the logic here is buy nice or buy twice. You need to stop this expansionist tendency right now at cost. Otherwise, 5 years down the road, it'll weaken the international economy even more. Right now, we're just talking about grain prices. Who knows what it's going to be down the road later?
And you're talking there about then the allies, supporting allies and the Western allies that are throwing their support behind Ukraine. Canada this week is, of course, embroiled in a diplomatic battle with India. Is there any connection or ramification there when it comes to where Canada then turns for diplomacy?
Well, the thing is, what I saw, and I'm not no specialist in India, but it appears that many of the Western allies are aligning themselves with Canada in this matter. I saw this morning that the United States are urging India to support an impartial investigation into this. So as of now, this doesn't seem to be a challenge with Western allies, but the Canada-India relationships are important in the sense that India has become a major market for Russian oil exports since the West stopped importing all that oil. And so India does have an important role to play in keeping the pressure up on Russia by, not paying exorbitant prices for the oil and shoring up the economy. So in the long run, it does make sense to keep India as an ally in the effort to contain Russian expansionism.
Where do you see, that geopolitical situation that you're talking about there? Where do you see this going?
I like to think myself an optimist in that matter, in that this is the second time within 10 years that the world has gone through this, and that this time people understand that the support for Ukraine has to be unwavering, unequivocal, and unlimited with regard for how long they will provide it. Because the global south, if Russia, for example, over the winter manages to completely destroy the sectors, the avenues that Ukraine can use to export their grain, there will be likely even more starvation in the global south. So it is imperative for the world community to rally behind this issue. And you could even see it that Lula da Silva met with Zelenskyy in Brazil in person, while he, as a member of the BRICS community, has an interest to be allied with Russia. Brazil needs to understands at this point, apparently, that these global ramifications will somewhere down the road affect them too, and it's important to get out ahead of that.
Would you consider this trip to Canada then a successful one?
The trip to Canada, definitely a successful one. Not so much that it established new things, because the support of Canada is unquestionable. You saw, like, if you compare it to the United States, where Zelensky's speech had to be relocated to the National Archives, ostensibly because Republicans didn't want to see him in Congress again. Whereas in Canada, you have unequivocal bipartisan support. You saw both sides of the House of Commons standing and cheering. So in this sense, it wasn't a mission of Zelenskyy to shore up additional support, but end this trip on a high note with one of the countries where support has been strongest and unwavering since last February.
It's good to speak with you today, and we'll continue to watch the rest of the visit by the Ukrainian president in Canada. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you too.
Florian Gassner is an associate professor in the Department of Central, Eastern, and Northern European Studies at UBC. and much more coverage of the visit by Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy in Canada throughout the day here on CBC. You can continue to watch CBC Newsnet on CBC Radio 1 as well, and watch our evening news tonight at 6 p.m. Also on our website, cbc.ca/news. It's 16 minutes past 12 o'clock now, past 1 o'clock in the Mountain Time Zone. This is BC Today. Well, the Union of BC Municipalities comes to a close, and with a keynote address by the Premier. Today, David Eby announced a few things. When it comes to wildfires, he announced $4.75 million toward rural firefighting. And he talked about more steps to speed up housing permits on the provincial side.
Many of you are seeing the impacts of the rapid growth in population in our province. The numbers are startling. 250,000 people now call British Columbia home who weren't here 2 years ago. We added 250,000 people in 2 years. And that rapid growth demands all kinds of responses: education, healthcare, housing. And that is in addition to the underlying housing challenges that we were already facing. And so to address this, we're going to have to work really tightly together. And I know that I have reached out and said municipalities need to be faster, need to be more willing to take on more density. And when I said that, many of you came to me and said, well, that's all well and fine for you to say, but what about provincial government processes? Maybe you should look in your own backyard before you start coming after us. And I think that's a fair comment. And so just this week, we announced a single portal for home builders to be able to move through provincial permitting processes faster, reductions of up to 50% in our own permitting times, with improvements still expected to come. And my commitment to you is that the provincial government, we're going to pull our weight when it comes to making sure that we're doing our work on this side. And we have to work together to deliver on this housing issue. And we're coming to you and we're asking you to do a lot of stuff. We have important legislation that's coming in the fall around zoning in our province, allowing additional density that is going to require you and your councils and your staff to do extra work. In addition to implementing provincial changes in direction, we also want you to have the capacity to reach out to other local governments and see, what are they doing? Is something working better down the road? Are there things you can coordinate together and be more efficient? You can't do this if you don't have the resources. I was in a meeting with mayors this morning, urban mayors, and they said, you got a lot of housing things you want to do. We're at our wits' end. We don't have the staff to be able to implement what you're talking about. Well, we've heard you, and my announcement today is that the provincial government will be providing $61 million for support for local governments to be able to ensure that your housing policy is the best it can possibly be, to support your communities, to give people a chance to find a place they can rent, a place that they can actually potentially get into the market, and you can be responsive to what we're asking, and we can actually have a true partnership on this critically important issue.
That's Premier David Eby speaking this morning to municipal leaders at the UBCM. And you heard him there announcing steps to speed up provincial processes for housing permits. He also announced $61 million in support for local governments to address their housing initiatives. And in a few minutes, David Eby will take questions from reporters, and we are going to take that live for you. He'll likely be asked about a number of issues, including housing. So we will bring that to you live as soon as it begins, so you can listen and watch. Right now, we are also taking your calls. You know, when it comes to housing permits, how big a challenge is permitting when it comes to addressing the housing crisis in BC? You can give us a call, 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733. You can hit pound 690 on your cell phone, or you can also email us, bctoday@cbc.ca. And joining me now is Sour Somerville, professor at UBC's Sauder School of Business. Hi, sir. Thanks so much for joining us.
It's always a pleasure.
So housing permits, how big a problem is it? How significant is it that the Premier seems to be addressing that today when it comes to the provincial side of the process?
Well, I think it's important for addressing it from the provincial side. To address it on the municipal side, they'll probably need some extra money in order to implement upgrades and various kinds of technological systems. It's also something that's been a focus from the federal government. there was a recent announcement about the Housing Accelerator Fund. That money is actually designed to help municipalities, improve their processing speeds. So there is money out there for coming together to try to get the permitting process to speed up. When you talk to a lot of developers, I think the frustration with the speed of the process and just how long it takes and how confusing it is very, very high very high on their list of complaints, probably even ahead of zoning reform.
Okay, and so how far does this go then? When he talks about on our side, we're going to do more with a hub. Let's just go. I'll go back to you for a reaction, Suor Somerville from UBC. But right now, let's go to Premier David Eby taking questions from reporters.
About this, what I can say is that this is a very serious, critical incident that's taken place in Coquitlam, and as soon as we can share more information, we will. But that the public is not at further risk at this time.
Do you have a follow-up question, Richard?
I do. One of the issues you heard a lot about at UBCM this week is around chronic offenders, the issue of mental health, supporting that. Will you push for chronic offender legislation with regards to bail so people get the help they need before being released?
Well, British Columbians will be familiar with the fact that our province has taken a leadership role with Ontario in pushing the federal government to reform their bail rules to ensure that repeat violent offenders, that repeat offenders are not waiting for trial in community, that they're waiting in custody to ensure the safety of the public. The bill did not pass the last legislative session. It stalled on the order paper, which was very frustrating and had all party support. It should have passed then. The good news is that it's passed the Parliament now. It's headed to the Senate. I'll be headed to Ottawa with colleagues to press and ensure that it makes it through the Senate as quickly as possible. There will be some meetings with senators because reform is certainly needed in this area and is overdue.
Our next question will come from Justin McElroy from CBC News. Go ahead, Justin.
Hi, Premier. John Horgan liked to say that he didn't like making funding announcements at UBCM because he thought it was the chance to listen to municipalities throughout the week and didn't feel it was appropriate. You obviously made a number of funding announcements today, particularly around rural BC and the MLAs behind you. Why do you think that was so important to do this week?
Well, I think there are two parts to government, and I absolutely agree with Premier Horgan that a key component is listening. And I think it's also important, there are a lot of local government officials, especially from rural areas, but certainly not exclusively, that need to know that we're not just listening, but we're also taking action. And so for the announcements that we've made today should reflect to them that we're hearing what they're saying about what the needs in their communities are, whether it's about housing, delivering more affordable housing, whether it's about their volunteer firefighters ensuring they have the equipment that they need, or people struggling with a cancer diagnosis being able to get to treatment and not having to worry about those logistics, being able to get the care they need. It's about demonstrating that we are listening and taking action.
Yeah, we heard a lot this week about housing. We heard your minister repeatedly say, what's coming, but I can't say publicly at this point. He also said announcements around short-term rentals will be happening as well. Are you confident at this point that you have more or less the full support or as much support as you're going to get from municipal governments on the changes and edicts that are coming down in the next few months?
There are people, right, as we're talking, who are looking at Craigslist trying to find a place to rent in our province. There are people who are looking at real estate listings and wondering if they'll ever be able to afford a home. This is an urgent matter, the housing crisis, and we are taking the action that is needed. And the thing that I'm really appreciative of in many, many meetings I had with local governments here is their commitment from their level as well, an understanding that we need to build housing for a rapidly growing population, for the next generation, to give young people a shot, for seniors to be able to stay in the communities that they love. And that I'm finding a growing consensus among between our government, municipal leaders, and the federal government. It's taken a long time to get here, But we've got that consensus now. And part of the announcement today was about supporting those local governments with the resources they need to have the staff to get that housing approved, get it out the door, and get it built for British Columbians urgently. Our agenda on housing is not a secret. There's a published plan around homes for British Columbians, where we're going, what the priority is, what the focus will be, and we're implementing that plan. And it's an ambitious housing agenda this fall, where we'll require the support of local governments, where we're going to take action on short-term rentals and open housing for people that's available today, and we've got a lot more to do.
That's Premier David Eby taking questions from reporters. You heard CBC's Justin McElroy there asking about housing. And just the previous topics that the Premier was talking about, he addressed bail reform, healthcare in rural parts of the province. And as we started there as well, you heard him talking about a serious critical incident that has taken place in Coquitlam. And a police incident is causing disruption in downtown Coquitlam. RCMP are asking people to avoid the area. The Premier said there is not a further threat to public safety, and he said they expect to be in a position through the RCMP to share more details soon. So we'll have more details for you as soon as we have them here on CBC as well. But the Premier said there are no further threat to public safety. And on housing, you heard Premier David Eby respond to a question about housing and support from municipalities. He did announce today the measures to speed up permit processing on the provincial side, given that the province has made demands on municipalities to speed up housing there. Also some support, $61 million in support for municipalities and their housing initiatives. And Sur Somerville is with me, professor at Sauder School of Business. What do you think of that then? Is that does that signal to you that the Premier is going to follow through with more support from municipalities, as he has also demanded that they, expedite their processes for building more housing?
I'm guessing, and obviously I don't know, that the promises of additional support will probably wait to be the carrot that comes along with the stick of the upzoning proposals that they'll be rolling out in the fall. Something along the lines of, well, we're making you put in this extra density, and so here's sort of extra provincial funds to tap for addressing some of the stresses that puts on infrastructure or the ability to process those things in a timely manner. Would seem to make sense to me to sort of hold off on some of that until you can tie that to the stick. But again, I mean, the nice thing about the money on process is that does allow municipalities, particularly, they can find a way to indicate that they'll be approving more housing, and more housing will get delivered, to then connect with the federal government's Housing Accelerator Fund. And so I think there's a way to leverage provincial support with municipal action and federal money to move the needle a little bit more than we certainly have seen in the last few years.
How do we ensure that the kind of housing that is built is what's needed, and not just more of the the high-end condos that still remain unaffordable?
So, I actually think that that's not the right question to ask for a couple of reasons. Number one, if all of a sudden there's a really large market at the high end, if you don't build the high end stuff, they're going to compete for lower end stuff and then upgrade it, right? So if the demand is there, meeting the demand, even if it's high end, is going to benefit the lower end. Tom Davidoff and I are doing some research right now for CMHC on the filtering process, on how the building of units, even if they're high end, leads to benefits elsewhere within the system. And that we're finding support in Canada for the research that's done elsewhere. So I think demanding that things be built for a particular market niche gets in the way of the fact that any housing that gets built is going to be a benefit, particularly if it's not necessarily associated with the loss of affordable units in the process.
Should there not be a balance, though, in terms of what we do require from developers?
Yeah, so I don't have a problem with sort of the things where we make a demand to say, hey, for certain benefits, either higher density or support in other ways, you have to provide affordable units. but it's not, as though there's some piggy bank of money that can be accessed. And when you start demanding that developers do things that the market wouldn't otherwise deliver, that's something that comes out of somebody's pocket somewhere. It is a zero-sum game. Now, if that means that they bid less for land, then you run into the problem of, well, are landowners willing to sell for a lower price just to ensure that the housing is more affordable?
Where does that leave people who can't afford those higher end units then?
So what we observe in the data is a sort of chain of moves where when you build higher end units and the people who occupy them, they free up units, and you end up getting units freed up even in lower income areas. So there's sort of a chain of process. And I think the thing to remember, if you didn't build those higher end units and there were people demanding higher end units, it's not like they wouldn't occupy housing. So if you don't provide housing for them, that's pushing their demand sort of further down the chain, and that's hurting lower income residents as well. So, I think bogging down in what kind of housing instead of building housing it's kind of the desire for perfection and the supply sort of being the enemy of the good here.
It's a continuing discussion, isn't it? As to
Yes, it is.
here
Yes,
we
it is.
have the announcement today. Just one more step in all the efforts to address the housing crisis in the province. So, thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. Appreciate your
Always a
analysis
pleasure.
today. Take care.
Bye.
Soar Somerville, professor at UBC's Sauder School of Business. And coming up in our next half hour here on BC Today, we will take your calls as our regular pets column returns, and this time asking you about your more unusual pets. What were the considerations and what are the challenges and when it comes to the care that's needed for unique pets? We'll take your calls with veterinarian Adrian Walton coming up in our next half hour. Right now, here's Robert Zimmerman with the CBC News Update.
Good afternoon. Premier David Eby has just spoken about what he calls a very serious critical incident in Coquitlam involving the RCMP. Eby says there is not a further threat to public safety. The RCMP are expected to release more details soon. A large number of officers have set up in the area of Glen Drive and Pine Tree Way. The relatives of two people who were killed last week in Chilliwack are shocked. The suspect has been released on bail. 83-year-old Robert Freeman is facing 2 counts of second-degree murder in connection with the deaths of 58-year-old John Kavaloff and 67-year-old Valerie Smith. And a graffiti-covered house in West Vancouver, which garnered widespread attention on social media earlier this year, has been destroyed by fire. When crews arrived at the home on Tyee Point, it was engulfed in flames. The property, which was built in 1951, has a current assessed value of more than $5.3 million. And now the forecast on the North Coast. Rain this afternoon, a bit windy with a high of 14. Highs reaching 22 with sunshine in the Peace. In the central interior, sunny with a high of 18 degrees. Highs from 20 to 23 with a mix of sun and cloud in the Kootenays. In the southern interior, mainly sunny with a high of 22. And for Metro Vancouver, Greater Victoria and the Fraser Valley, sunny this afternoon, hazy in some areas with highs up to 24 inland. I'll have more local news at the top of the hour. Now back to Michelle with BC Today.
Thank you very much, Rob. Enjoy the last day of summer.
Thank you. It's getting rainy, right?
It sure will. I'm already wondering what my plans will be. I got in a couple of hikes last week, just thinking, this is it. So
no, last October was very nice, right?
Yeah. No,
but I thought we were going to talk about pets.
Yes, we are talking about
We had a chinchilla when I was a kid.
Okay.
Yes.
I never know if it's something that resonates with you. Okay, so tell us about
sure.
the chinchilla.
Well, it didn't really do much, to be honest, but it was super, super soft. Like a super soft hamster.
Was it challenging to take care of, or?
It just lived in a box.
Yes,
so
that's
not really.
our makeup artist Molly that we're working with today. She once had an iguana, whom she called Freddy Krueger because it had very sharp talons.
I bet it
no.
did.
Paws? Claws. That's it. Adrian Walton is correcting my terminology now. But what was your chinchilla named?
Freddie. There was 2 originally. It was Fred and Wilma, and Wilma died, so we had Freddie.
Freddie. Okay, so different pop culture references, but Freddy Krueger on her end and Freddie
That's right.
Flintstone.
Yeah, right.
For you.
Couple of Freddies.
Yeah, look at that. Okay, you can go talk to her then. Thanks for sharing that with us.
Okay, sure.
Yeah.
All right, see ya.
See you later. Rob Zimmerman in the CBC Vancouver newsroom. You never know what he's excited to talk about, so there you go.
I know, I'm going to have to name my next pet Freddie.
Freddie, apparently.
We got to keep it going.
Make it a 3 for 3. Welcome back. This is BC Today here on CBC Radio 1, as well as CBC Gem, cbc.ca/BC, as well as the CBC Vancouver YouTube page. Yes, our pets column is back. We can talk about dogs and cats. Many of them many of us love them, of course. But what about bunnies and turtles, snakes even perhaps? We're talking about the more unusual pets today, chinchillas even. You can give us a call on that. We want to hear from you. What are your unique pets? What are the challenges of having an unusual pet? If you have any health questions, you can give us a call too. What do you think people need to think about when considering a unique pet, perhaps an exotic pet? There are some things that you do need to consider there. So give us a call, 1-800-825-5950. 604-669-3733. You can also hit pound 690 on your cell phone. And you can email us too. It's bctoday@cbc.ca. And my guest in studio is Adrian Walton. He's a veterinarian and owner of Dewdney Animal Hospital in Maple Ridge. And he's been good enough to join me here in studio. Hello.
Hi.
Unique pets. What are the examples that you've seen?
Well, actually, at my clinic, we do a lot of exotics. We keep a lot of exotics. So we see quite a range. So we've had everything from, well, just to give you an example, in the last week, we've had chinchillas, bunnies, hamsters, rats. We've had a couple of birds, but those were mostly wildlife. But we've had everything. We had a question yesterday, do we see capybaras? Because somebody's thinking of getting one of those.
Yeah.
They're basically like giant guinea pigs. So
And-
yeah, we see everything.
And you have seen them. You have seen them at your office. Now you did send us some pictures as well of some bunnies and a tortoise and a snake too. We're going to put them up on our live stream right now, and you can tell us. Okay, so oh, that's adorable, and they're even dressed up. Who are we looking at there?
So the animals that you're seeing there were a couple of rabbits that were dumped on us a couple of weeks ago.
Okay.
And so we're desperate to try and find homes for them. And we've
house
called them Bunny Pacino, Rabbit, and I forget the names.
Rabbit De Niro, I think
Rabbit
you
De
told me,
Niro.
which I love.
Yeah.
And you have a tortoise there named Fluffy.
Yeah, that was named by my daughter when she was 4 years old. And this animal is going to be going to her and her grandkids and her great-grandkids.
Oh, wow.
Because this is a species that can live 100 to 150 years. So it's really important that when you get something that lives this long, like a bird, like a parrot or a tortoise, that you have some planning for what's gonna happen after your lifespan's finished.
Okay, so this tortoise is going to go to her family.
It has to. We've been telling her since she was 3, this is going to be yours. She's also going to be taking on my box turtles, which I've had since I was 7 years of age. One of them's about 65. The other one's coming up to 50.
Oh my goodness, yeah. So they do live quite long, and you actually there's a snake in there as well, isn't there?
Yeah.
What kind of snake is that? It's it's kind of brown and white, isn't it?
That is a ball python. And
ball python.
we actually were very fortunate. Last weekend, there was an incredible reptile show in Abbotsford through the BC Reptile Club. And that's a great place for people to get experience and ask questions before they purchase these animals on a whim. The big problem with exotics is people buying these animals without doing the proper research.
Absolutely, I can imagine that. I mean, I imagine would need to research where you're even obtaining these animals from.
Exactly. You should never buy a wild-caught animal. You should be trying to find a good quality breeder who will support you when you get the animal, how to set up for its enclosures, and also be able to help you with information going down not only a year, but 5 years out, because as these animals change, so does their needs. And you need to be able to supply that.
Absolutely.
Because I will tell you right now, there are no homes for exotic animals in British Columbia. There are no rescues for reptiles.
Right.
And the few rabbit rescues we have are severely overwhelmed because people have been getting pets without doing the proper research.
And that not being able to follow through.
Correct.
Oh my goodness. So what are the concerns then when it comes to animal welfare?
From a welfare perspective, we've got a couple of things. There's what's called legacy husbandry, people who get rabbits who think that they should live in hutches. Well, that's not the way we take care of rabbits now. Now we have large pens or let them free roam in the house. So this is something that you should be considering before getting a rabbit, thinking you're going to just stick it outside in a little tiny hutch.
Right.
For reptiles, the new rules are that you need an enclosure that's at least the length of the snake. If it's a lizard, 3 or 4 times the length of the snake. So these enclosures have gotten bigger with time. We've started off getting better lighting, better heating, and better nutrition. And so you want to avoid the way you used to do things when you were a kid.
Yeah.
And instead, talk to somebody who is very informed on these animals and get the proper information.
You talk there about lighting and heating because what you're trying to do is replicate their natural habitat?
That's right. We were talking, actually, you mentioned Freddy Krueger. This was an iguana that she had when she was younger.
Yes.
And at that time, people were keeping these things in tanks. And I give kudos to your
To Molly.
to Molly, because her enclosure was massive. She had it in her bathroom where it was super humid, something that here in British Columbia, we can't usually replicate because these guys come from the tropics. They have really high humidity environments. So she was doing a really good job of taking care of her animals, where a lot of the animals that I see in my day-to-day practice are not given even the bare minimum of what they need. So this is why education is so important.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's what we're doing today. So I'm glad that you're here with us. Adrian Walton, veterinarian from Dudney Animal Hospital in Maple Ridge, asking you to give us a call. You can share your experience with unique and unusual animals. What are the concerns and the considerations there when it comes to their care? You know, what are the things that you have kept in mind and have thought about? What do you want to share with other people too? Give us a call, 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733, and you can hit pound 690 as well. Chris is joining us from the Malahat. Hi, Chris.
Greetings. How are you doing?
Greetings to you. Thanks very much for calling. Do you have an unusual pet?
We have 5 birds, Jende conure, a couple cockatiels, green cheek conure, multiple fish, Chinese water dragon, bearded dragon, 2 sugar gliders, 3 ball pythons, 1 boa, 2 sugar gliders, and multiple geckos, and a tegu.
Okay. How many animals is that in total, Chris?
A lot.
A lot. Where are they? Where do you
keep dogs and cats? Yeah.
And dogs. Okay, sorry. Can you just hold on a second? Pause. What does your where do you keep them? What does your place look like?
It looks my place looks like animals. But the birds, they get they're in their cages generally. But they get out and get lots of attention because they're birds and they need that lots of attention. The fish are fish. They have a nice big 55-gallon aquarium. The tegu has like an 8-foot enclosure. He gets out to roam around the bedroom and have showers and things like that. The sugar gliders are in their big, massive enclosure. The snakes are in very large enclosures for them, and they have their heating pads and their dark areas, and all of our lizards have the proper UVB lighting and the heat spots, and cool spots for them. There's a tortoise somewhere in there. God, a Chinese water dragon's got one gosh darn heck of an enclosure, I'll tell you.
Okay.
Got, like leaves and everything, and yeah.
What? Did you want to ask a question, Adrian?
Well, actually, so far I'm impressed because he's actually describing proper enclosures, which I have to tell you is quite rare. So this is an individual, Chris. I give you kudos. You are doing your research on it. The only thing I'd be reminding you is make sure that you've got some planning for, because most of these animals are going to outlive you. The tegu's 20, 25 years. The
what is
tortoise,
a tegu?
It's basically a large monitor lizard type.
Okay.
Yeah, ours is only about 5 foot full grown. That's as big as it gets. That's the breed of tegu that it is.
Only 5 foot. Okay.
Yeah. Also, that's tail.
Yeah. Oh, wow. Okay, so it sounds like you have a lot of space and you're doing things properly when it comes to their environment. What about feeding and just daily life? What's that like, Chris?
Well, the geckos are all on a schedule. Monday, Wednesday, Friday, they get their feeding. The tegu gets fed just because of the season it is. It gets fed twice a week, but we feed it frozen quail, frozen mice, but we thaw them out, of course. And then there's a special meatloaf my wife, this is Freudian slip. My wife makes for the tegu, and the sugar gliders get a special concoction of fruits and fruit slurry, and the snakes get rats. They get fed probably the pythons will only eat like once every 3 weeks to a month.
Okay.
The boa likes to eat every couple of weeks. And it just goes. The list goes on.
It sure does. How hard is it for you? I mean, how challenging is that?
It's more challenging for me. Like I said, I'm not the owner of any of these pets. I don't like the responsibility, so I don't take on the responsibility of owning a pet because it is a big.
So you, hopefully the sugar glider isn't there to, so pardon me, so you don't own these, you're there just taking care of them?
Yeah, no, they're all my wife's and my kids.
Okay.
Yeah, and and I do help take care of them.
Okay.
But there are some days, especially on snake and tegu feeding night, when you got to feed the gliders,
I think with so many animals, I think the main question is how many hours a week do you have to devote to the care of these animals? Because I guarantee you the snakes and the lizards might take a little less time, but the sugar gliders require daily care and the birds require daily care. And it sounds like your family has kind of come around to
them,
take care of these animals. But I always warn people that it's more work than you realize. And so if you know an idea of how much time, I think the audience would appreciate it.
It is a lot of work. So on a busy night where all of the animals just happen to be getting fed all at the same time, between me, my wife, and my 4 kids, who all stay at home, and they own some of them, if you put all the time together, you're probably looking at about 4 hours on a busy night.
4 hours per night.
And you have to have people that are willing to dedicate that amount of time. Because so many people will get these creatures and then, life changes. All of a sudden, the kids are in after school stuff and it's very easy for the care and maintenance to decline. So Chris has come up with a great plan. They're all working together. But for other people who are thinking of exotics, keep this in mind because
don't underestimate.
I will say they're especially with lizards, they're very, very delicate creatures. You have to do your research per species of lizard that you're getting per type, and because they're all going to have different heating, humidity requirements, cooling requirements. Some of them take none. Some of them are very, very complex. So
it sounds,
really
Chris,
do your research.
Absolutely, it sounds like you're not taking this lightly, Chris.
Oh, absolutely not. They're alive, man.
Yeah. Okay.
And they didn't have a choice to be born, but here they are, and we're going to do our best to take care of them.
Okay, Chris, thank you so much for the call.
All right, thank you.
All the
have
best to you. I think you too have a great day. I think everyone's wishing you well in your.
And he's doing everything right, and that's why I like to talk to people about exotics care. The issue is I say for exotics, they are the greatest pets for 2% of the population. They are the worst pet for the other 98%. And that's why none of these animals should ever be considered a whim. And that's one of the reasons why I have problems with pet stores selling these animals, because it's too easy to just go in and purchase one. Where if you're reaching out to the BC Reptile Club or BC Facebook Reptile Connections on Facebook, you can interact with people who know these animals, who know the care that's required, and you can get a lot better information than you can just from YouTube, which is an absolute horrible place to get information on this type of care for these animals.
Just about anything, I think.
Yeah.
But what about there are actually some animals, or there are animals that are actually illegal to obtain and to have.
Oh yeah, I've got enough of them.
You
Yeah.
do?
Oh, yeah.
Why?
Because what happens is people get these animals because they think it's cool, and then and the most common one is a situation where the mother-in-law starts screaming to the SPCA and conservation that their daughter's husband has a giant snake. Even though the snake could be perfectly normal and safe to have around, they'll report it. So the problem is people get these animals illegally, and they get reported, and now all of a sudden, if you have a large constrictor, if you have anything venomous, anything like what's the other one? There's some frogs that are illegal. They're all under the Controlled Alien Species Act, so they're illegal. So I'm the only guy who has the permits for them, so they show up on my doorstep. The other one are things like oxalotls. Well, oxalotls are illegal in British Columbia because the Wildlife Act says that anything in the family of the spotted salamanders that we have here, the tiger salamanders, you can't own. So oxalotls, even though they're from Mexico, are illegal to own in British Columbia. So these guys get surrendered, and so I have nowhere to put them. So I'm basically collecting small numbers of animals until I can rehome them out of province.
Wow, what a process.
And I'm running out because there's new legislation going through called the Jane Goodall Act that's going to make a lot of these animals illegal. And that's already through second reading in the Senate. So yeah, that's going to be federal. And then I've got nowhere to put these animals.
Wow, and that's a lot of care as well to take on. And I think we had Lynn.
I have staff.
That's right. We had Lynn on the line, but I think we lost our caller, Lynn. But I think she was just going to say that, she's concerned about perhaps making light or, encouraging or not doing due diligence when it comes to these exotic animals, or should they even be, people may be uncomfortable with the idea, right?
Yeah, and there are animals that definitely should not be pets. The large parrots. Nobody can have a proper environment for a large macaw. These animals need flight aviaries that you just can't do. I still find it upsetting that they are legal here. The large snakes, well, the enclosure size have changed. What we used to keep them in, we can't do now. So I'm fine with them being illegal in British Columbia because nobody has an entire room to dedicate to a Burmese python. But the smaller animals, if you have the education, can make wonderful pets. The problem is so many people get them for the wrong reasons. And this is why we talk about education so much and how, and there's a reason why the BCSPCA has a strong adherence that these animals shouldn't be pets.
Right.
Totally understand where they're coming from.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I hate to say it, there are people in the pet community who can keep species better than zoos and aquariums and keep more variety of genetics than what you can see in a zoo or an aquarium. That being said, there's a profit thing that's going on in the exotics pets trade that I have complete hatred for. So people breeding weird colors like pumpkin. Pumpkin was a surrender to us. That's the ball python.
Okay.
Or people that are stealing animals from the wild to sell in the pet trade.
Yeah.
Completely unethical. But if you have something like a crested gecko or a bearded dragon that you can breed small quantities and keep it for the pet trade locally, I have no problems with that. So there's a lot of, this is why it's so important for people to do their research. And I know I keep harping on that.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that.
As somebody who does take on a lot of animals, most of it's because people didn't do their research in the beginning. They got a baby dinosaur for their kid from from a pet store. And when that kid got older and got bored of it, what happens? Well, that is now the parents' responsibility. And they should be able to keep that animal for that animal's life. But sadly, too many people have it for a year or two, get bored, and then what happens?
Is this just my own ignorance? Did you say baby dinosaur?
Well, that's what why kids want a bearded dragon.
Okay,
because
that's
they want to have their own
pet
pet dinosaur.
Okay, yeah, I see.
So every time Jurassic Park comes out, we get a bunch of baby animals that people have purchased for their kids.
Yeah,
and these are not pets for kids.
Right.
These are pets for adults who have done the research.
And what about, we've been talking about health concerns. What are some of the illnesses or ramifications and consequences that you see?
Yeah, so a few years ago, my kid was in school and we had a traveling reptile show come up. And I sat there going, no, my kid's not going to that.
Wow.
Why? Because there's too much potential for a disease called salmonella. You can't use the alcohol wipes that they use. You have to actually literally wash your hands. So these animals are not for kids. These animals are for adults. You have parasites like roundworms that can potentially get into your children because they don't wash their hands properly and go to places that they're not, because those worms, when they hatch, don't know where they're going.
Yeah.
The other thing we have to consider is the fact that some of these animals can bite and scratch,
yeah.
as Freddy Krueger so aptly named.
Yes.
So again, no, these animals should not be for kids. They're for adults. If you want to get your kid a pet, get a rat.
Okay, really?
Yeah.
I don't even know if I would do that, but yeah.
They live 2-3 years.
Okay.
They're super clean. They're super smart. And I constantly have parents coming in, can you convince my kid not to get a rat? And I said, no, you want them to get a rat. And then a year and a half later, when the rat gets cancer, it's the parents that are coming in paying $300-400 to remove the tumor, not the kid. Rats, best pet for kids.
Okay, just they've seen movies with rats as well, I imagine. So there you go. It's all about what they see on Disney, I guess. And so if someone is, I mean, you've talked about this already, right? To research. But what are the things they really need to consider to make sure they are that 2% that can handle an unusual pet?
Sure. So first off, again, talk to people who breed these animals, who keep these animals, so you get a better sense of what the actual owning of them is like. Consider what's going to happen, not 5, but 10 years down the road, where you're going to be. So if it's like you're trying to you have a 12-year-old who's wanting to buy a bearded dragon, well, where's that bearded dragon going to be living when your kid's 30?
Yeah.
So these are things you need to plan ahead for. That being said, if this is the right animal for you, that's great. But as I said, it's an education thing, and remember, it's only for a very small, well-informed percentage of the population.
Yeah, really keep that in mind. It's great to have you for that type of education. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Adrian Walton is a veterinarian, owner of Dudney Animal Hospital in Maple Ridge. That's it for our show today. Thanks so much to everyone who called in. My thanks as well to our team here on the show: Rachel Adams, Michelle Morton, Alan Regan, Greg Kisser, George Baker, Mashid Hadi, Mel Carter, and Mark Fairfield. I'm Michelle Eliot. You can watch us again on CBC Vancouver's YouTube page or on the CBC Gem app. You can listen again as well. Just use the CBC Listen app. I'm Michelle Eliot. Thank you very much for joining us, listening, and watching. Have a great weekend. We'll talk on Monday.